Etched into the marble threshold of a ruined temple on Mount Olympus's eastern slope, these words preserve the testament of Cassandra the widow, whose solitary grief became the foundation for love's most unexpected triumph. What follows is neither myth nor dream, but the quiet truth of how two broken souls discovered that healing begins not with forgetting the past, but with choosing to build something new from its fragments. Before we begin, subscribe now so you don't miss more stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The stone house perched on the mountain's shoulder like a monument to solitude, its thick walls carved from the living rock and its narrow windows facing east toward the sunrise that marked each day's reluctant beginning. Cassandra had built it with her own hands during the first year of her widowhood, when grief was still fresh as an open wound, and the weight of others' pity had driven her to seek refuge in places where human voices could not reach. 7 years had passed since the fever took her husband Menelaus and their twin sons. 7 years since she had climbed into these heights, carrying nothing but her loom, her few possessions, and the bitter knowledge that the world below held only memories too painful to bear. The mountain had accepted her offering of solitude with the same indifference it showed to eagles and storms, asking only that she prove herself strong enough to survive its challenges. Her days followed rhythms older than civilization itself, rising with the sun to tend her small garden, carved from thin soil and stone, weaving the wool from her handful of goats into cloth, fine enough to trade in the valley markets, preserving the wild fruits and herbs that sustained her through winter's harsh embrace. It was a life pared down to essentials, stripped of everything except the bare requirements of survival. But on this morning, as autumn painted the lower slopes in shades of gold and crimson, the sound that shattered her carefully maintained peace was unmistakably human. The crash of something heavy falling, followed by a groan that spoke of pain beyond endurance. From her doorway, she could see a figure collapsed on the narrow path that wound up from the valley below, bronze armor glinting in the morning light like scattered coins. The rational part of her mind counseled caution. Strangers brought complications, and complications threatened the delicate balance she had spent years constructing. But as she watched the figure struggle to rise and fail, falling back onto the rocky ground with movements that spoke of strength pushed beyond its limits, something deeper than reason stirred in her chest. She had sworn to live without the burden of caring for others, to exist in the pure solitude that grief had taught her to value above all else. But as the figure on the path went still, and silence returned to the mountain like water filling an empty vessel, she realized that some choices were made not by the mind, but by the heart's stubborn refusal to let suffering pass unwitnessed. The young man lay unconscious on her threshold like an offering the mountain had deposited at her feet, his bronze corselet cracked and stained with blood both old and fresh. His dark hair was matted with sweat and dirt, his face gaunt with hunger and marked by the kind of exhaustion that came from pushing beyond the body's willingness to continue. But beneath the grime and weariness, she could see the strong bones and careful proportions that spoke of noble birth and proper training. Cassandra knelt beside him in the morning light, her hands moving with the practical skill of someone who had tended many wounds in her former life as a soldier's wife. The injuries were serious but not fatal. A deep gash along his ribs where some enemy's spear had found its mark, smaller cuts on his arms and face that spoke of recent combat, and the telltale signs of starvation that hollowed his cheeks and made his hands tremble even in unconsciousness. "Can you hear me?" she asked, her voice rusty from disuse but still carrying the gentle authority that had once commanded a household's respect. His eyes opened slowly, the deep brown of autumn leaves, and for a moment they held the confusion of someone waking in an unfamiliar place. Then awareness returned, bringing with it the careful wariness of a man who had learned that survival often depended on quickly assessing potential threats. "Where?" he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Safe," Cassandra replied simply. "For now." She helped him into her dwelling, supporting his weight as he struggled to remain upright. The single room that served as her entire world seemed to shrink with his presence, the carefully arranged space suddenly feeling cramped and insufficient. But she settled him on the narrow bed that occupied one corner, then moved, to prepare the simple remedies that mountain life had taught her to value. "What is your name?" she asked as she cleaned his wounds with water heated over her small fire. "Alexios," he answered, wincing as her cloth found tender spots. Of nowhere now." The bitterness in his voice spoke of recent losses that went beyond physical injury. Cassandra had heard that tone before. In her own voice during the first months after death had emptied her world of meaning. It was the sound of someone who had discovered that identity could be stripped away as easily as armor, leaving only the raw fact of continued existence. "Rest," she said, settling a woolen blanket over his shoulders. "Strength returns more quickly when it is not forced." As she moved about her evening tasks, banking the fire, securing her door against the night wind, preparing the simple meal that would sustain them both, she found herself aware of his presence in ways that surprised her. The sound of his breathing, the way he shifted restlessly in sleep, the quiet murmur of words in a dream that carried pain too deep for waking consciousness to bear. 7 years of solitude had taught her to find peace in silence, but tonight, the silence felt different, not empty, but full of possibilities she had not allowed herself to consider since grief had driven her to this mountain refuge. 3 days passed in the careful dance of strangers, learning to share space without stepping on tender places. Alexios proved himself a courteous guest, accepting her simple hospitality with gratitude that seemed genuine rather than calculated. He helped with what tasks his healing wounds allowed, carrying water from the spring, tending her fire, performing the small repairs that maintained her carefully constructed refuge. But it was in the evening hours, when work was done, and they sat together watching shadows lengthen across the mountain slopes, that Cassandra began to glimpse the man beneath the warrior's exterior. He spoke little of his past, but what he revealed painted a picture of service turned sour, of loyalty betrayed, and honor twisted into something unrecognizable. "I was captain of the guard in Thebes," he confided on the third night, his voice carrying the weight of confession. "Sworn to protect the city and serve its people. But when the politics changed and new masters took power, they demanded actions that no honorable man could perform." "And you refused?" Cassandra asked, understanding more than he perhaps intended. "I tried to find middle ground," Alexios replied, his hands clenched in his lap. "Some way to serve both conscience and duty. But in the end, there was no compromise possible. I could either become something I despised or lose everything I had worked to build." The firelight played across his features as he spoke, revealing the pain that lay beneath his careful composure. Cassandra recognized the expression. She had seen it in her own reflection during the months when grief had taught her that the world cared little for individual suffering. "So you chose exile over shame," she said quietly. "I chose to remain myself rather than become a stranger wearing my face," he corrected, though I wonder sometimes if that was courage or merely a different kind of cowardice. Cassandra was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the flames that danced in her small hearth. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Courage is not the absence of fear," she said. "It is choosing what matters most, when every choice carries a price you would rather not pay." Their conversation continued long into the night, touching on subjects she had not discussed with another soul since her self-imposed exile began. Loss, loneliness, the strange peace that came from living without the constant pressure of others' expectations. And gradually, as trust began to replace wariness, she found herself speaking of her own journey to this mountain refuge. "My husband was a soldier," she said, her voice steady despite the memories it carried. "He died protecting our city from raiders, and our sons followed him into death 3 days later when fever swept through the refugee camps. I buried them in a single grave and climbed into these mountains because I could not bear to remain in a world that had taken everything I loved." Alexios listened without offering empty consolations or meaningless reassurances, and in his silence she found the kind of understanding that could only come from someone who had walked similar paths of loss. But as the fire burned low and they prepared to seek rest in their separate corners of the small dwelling, both understood that something significant had begun between them. Not romance, not yet, but the recognition of kinship between souls who had learned that survival sometimes required choosing solitude over the illusion of belonging. Autumn deepened into the serious business of preparing for winter's harsh demands, and with it came a natural rhythm of shared labor that transformed their careful courtesy into something approaching partnership. Alexios's strength returned gradually, allowing him to take on the heavier tasks that maintained their mountain refuge, cutting firewood, hunting the small game that supplemented their stores, reinforcing the stone walls that kept out winter winds. Cassandra found herself adjusting her routines to accommodate his presence, but the adjustments felt natural rather than forced. She taught him to read the mountain's moods through cloud formations and wind patterns. He shared the practical skills that military life had given him: how to preserve meat without salt, how to craft tools from bone and wood, how to find shelter and water in seemingly barren terrain. But it was in the smaller gestures that their relationship began to deepen beyond mere cooperation. The way he rose early to build up her fire before the cold could reach her sleeping corner. The care with which she prepared meals that would help his wounds heal properly. The unconscious way they began to move around each other in the small space, their bodies learning to accommodate another presence without collision or awkwardness. "You have built something remarkable here," Alexios observed one evening as they sorted through the wild apples she had gathered from hidden groves. "Most people could not survive alone in such a place." "Survival was not my goal," Cassandra replied, her hands busy with the familiar work of cutting and drying fruit for winter storage. "I came here to escape, to find a place where I could exist without constantly being reminded of what I had lost." "And did you find it?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Cassandra paused in her work, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I found peace," she said finally, "or perhaps exhaustion deep enough to feel like peace. But I also found loneliness so complete that sometimes I wondered if I had become a ghost haunting my own life." Alexios was quiet for a moment, his own hands still among the red and golden fruit. "And now?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke from their evening fire, carrying implications that neither was quite ready to examine directly. Cassandra looked at him across the small table that had become the center of their shared domestic life. This man who had stumbled into her carefully constructed solitude and somehow made it feel less like exile and more like home. "Now I remember what it feels like to speak with someone who understands the weight of difficult choices," she said carefully. "To share tasks with hands that work willingly rather than from obligation. To end each day knowing that tomorrow will bring conversations as well as chores." Their eyes met in the flickering lamplight, and in that moment both understood that their relationship had evolved beyond simple hospitality into something that demanded honest acknowledgement. But before either could find words for what was growing between them, the sound of approaching footsteps on the mountain path announced that their isolated peace was about to face its first real test. The three men who climbed the rocky path to Cassandra's refuge wore the rough clothing of mountain shepherds, but their eyes held the calculating sharpness of those who made their living from others' misfortune. They approached with the false friendliness of predators who had learned that honey caught more prey than vinegar. Their leader, a scar-faced man with graying hair and hands that bore the calluses of sword work, speaking with oily courtesy. "Good evening, sister," he called out as they drew near. "We are travelers seeking shelter for the night. Surely mountain custom demands that you share your fire with those in need." Cassandra emerged from her dwelling with Alexios beside her, both reading the threat beneath the polite words. These were not honest shepherds caught by darkness, but the kind of men who preyed on isolated settlements and lone travelers. The weapons they carried, good bronze hidden beneath rough cloaks, confirmed what their manner had already suggested. "I have little to spare," Cassandra replied carefully, her voice steady despite the fear that quickened her pulse. "And my home is small for so many guests." "Oh, we're not particular about accommodations," the leader said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "And we can pay well for whatever hospitality you might offer." His gaze lingered on Alexios with the assessment of a fighter evaluating potential opposition. What he saw was a young man still bearing the signs of recent injury, possibly dangerous but probably manageable if properly handled. What he missed was the subtle shift in Alexios's stance, the quiet readiness that spoke of training that went bone deep. "Perhaps you should continue to the valley," Alexios suggested, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made smart men reconsider their options. "The path is treacherous in darkness, but moonlight will make it passable for those who know the way." "Oh, we know these mountains well," the scar-faced man replied, his false friendliness beginning to show cracks. "We know who lives where, who has what, who might be missed if they traveled on to other places." The threat was clear now, stripped of pretense. 3 armed men against 2, one a woman, the other still recovering from wounds. Simple mathematics that had probably served them well in the past. But as they began to spread out in the classic pattern of hunters surrounding prey, they discovered that some calculations failed to account for variables they had not considered. Cassandra moved with swift precision to the woodpile beside her door, her hands finding the long-handled axe she used for splitting logs. Not a weapon of war, but in skilled hands it could serve. Alexios, meanwhile, had produced a knife from somewhere in his clothing. Not the eating blade of a civilian, but the fighting knife of a soldier who understood that survival sometimes required tools more subtle than swords. "Last chance to leave peacefully," Alexios said, his voice carrying the flat certainty of a man who had made his decision and would not be swayed from it. The leader's answer was to draw his sword with a sound like bronze singing against leather, and in that moment, the careful piece of Cassandra's mountain refuge exploded into violence as sudden and brutal as summer lightning. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes, but it transformed everything between them with the terrible clarity that comes only from facing death together. Alexios moved with the deadly grace of a warrior in his element, using the terrain and his opponent's overconfidence to turn numbers against them. Cassandra proved herself no helpless victim, but a woman who had learned that survival sometimes required violence, her axe finding its mark with precision born of desperation and determination. When the last bandit fell silent and the mountain air once again carried only the sound of wind in the pines, they stood together in the aftermath, breathing hard and staring at each other across the space that violence had both divided and united. Blood stained the rocky ground before Cassandra's door, not their blood, but the evidence of what they had been forced to become in order to remain themselves. "Are you hurt?" Alexios asked, his voice hoarse with exertion and concern. Cassandra shook her head, though her hands trembled as she set down the axe that had become an instrument of survival. "You? Nothing serious," he replied, though she could see fresh blood darkening his sleeve where one of the bandits had found its mark. They worked together in wordless cooperation to drag the bodies away from her threshold, to clean the blood from stone and earth, to restore the appearance of peace to their refuge. But both understood that something fundamental had changed between them. They had seen each other in extremity, had fought back to back against odds that could have destroyed them both, had discovered that trust could be tested in the crucible of violence and emerged stronger for the experience. "They knew this place," Cassandra said, as they sat beside her fire later that night, sharing wine that helped steady nerves still raw from combat. They spoke as if they had been watching, planning. "There will be others," Alexios agreed grimly. "Word will spread that a woman lives alone here, vulnerable to those who see isolation as opportunity." The implications hung between them like smoke from their evening fire. Her refuge was no longer secure. The peace she had built through 7 years of careful solitude had been shattered by the simple fact that others knew of her existence and saw profit in her vulnerability. "I could leave," she said quietly, though the words tasted like ash in her mouth. "Find some other place, start again. Or," Alexios said, his voice carrying careful weight, "you could let me stay, not as a guest recovering from wounds, but as a permanent member of this household." Cassandra looked at him across the small space that had become their shared world, seeing not the stranger who had collapsed on her threshold weeks before, but the man who had stood beside her when death came calling. In his eyes, she saw not pity or calculation, but something that looked remarkably like love, quiet, tested, and true. "As what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "As your husband, if you will have me," Alexios replied with simple honesty. "As your partner in all things, your protector when protection is needed, your companion for whatever years remain to us both." The proposal hung in the air between them, like a prayer offered to uncertain gods, and Cassandra realized that the choice before her would determine not just her immediate safety, but the shape of whatever life she chose to build from the fragments of what had come before. The wedding was witnessed only by mountain peaks and morning stars, blessed by no priest except the sunrise that painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and rose. Cassandra had woven herself a simple chiton from the finest wool her goats could provide, while Alexios cleaned his battered armor until it gleamed like bronze mirrors in the early light. They spoke their vows in words older than any temple, promises that bound them not just in law, but in the deeper covenant of two souls choosing to face whatever came together rather than apart. "I take you as you are," Cassandra said, her hands clasped with his beside the spring that provided their water, "not to heal old wounds, but to help you carry their scars with honor. I offer you not just shelter, but a home where you can be yourself without shame or pretense." "I take you as you are," Alexios replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, "not to replace what you have lost, but to help you build something new from what remains. I offer you not just protection, but partnership in all the work of living." They sealed their bond with a kiss that tasted of mountain air and wild honey, of second chances and the courage to believe that love could grow in even the most unlikely soil. Around them, the peaks stood silent witness to a union that would transform not just their individual lives, but the very nature of what marriage could mean when built on equality rather than dependency. The years that followed brought challenges that tested their bond in ways neither had anticipated. Harsh winters that trapped them for months in their stone refuge. The difficult work of expanding their small homestead into something that could support a family. The gradual arrival of children who learned from birth that love was not a fairy tale, but a daily choice to care for each other despite difficulties and disappointments. But they also brought unexpected joys. The discovery that shared burdens were lighter than those carried alone. The peace that came from building something lasting together. The deep satisfaction of watching their children grow into adults who understood that strength came not from dominance, but from the willingness to support others when support was needed. Cassandra never returned to the valley life she had fled, but the valley gradually climbed to her. Travelers began to seek out their mountain refuge, drawn by stories of the widow and warrior who had found love in exile and built something beautiful from the fragments of their broken lives. Young couples came seeking advice about marriage. Widows and widowers climbed the mountain path, looking for hope that life could continue after devastating loss. Soldiers who had fallen from grace found shelter and the possibility of redemption. Their home became a place of pilgrimage for those whom life had taught harsh lessons about loss and survival. And from each visitor they learned new ways to transform pain into wisdom, isolation into community, the necessity of survival into the joy of truly living. In her final years, when her hair had turned silver and her hands bore the marks of decades spent in useful work, Cassandra would sit in the garden she had carved from mountain stone and watch the sunset paint the peaks in colors that changed with each passing moment. Beside her, Alexios, now gray-bearded and bent with age but still carrying himself with the dignity of a man who had chosen honor over ease, would share the comfortable silence of people who had learned that the deepest conversations happened without words. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked one evening as they watched their grandchildren play among the apple trees they had planted together. "Giving up your solitude for this chaos of family and community?" "Every day," Cassandra replied with a smile that held decades of contentment, and never once. For she had learned that love's greatest miracle was not the healing of old wounds, but the discovery that two people who chose to care for each other could create something larger and more beautiful than either could have achieved alone. In a world that measured worth by conquest and accumulation, they had proven that the greatest victory was simply the daily choice to build rather than destroy, to shelter rather than expose, to love rather than merely survive.